Hi,
Listeners,
I'm
thank
Nancy
you for
Horton, and
joining
you're
us for
listening
this
to ADA
episode. You
Live.
can access all ADA Live episodes with archive audio,
Yo,
accessible transcripts, and resources on our website at adalive.org. You can listen to the SoundCloud ADA Live channel at
alright, let's roll.
soundcloud.com
Let's
slash
go.
ADA Live. Download ADA Live to your mobile device. Go
Hello,
to your
everyone.
podcast
On
app
behalf
and
of the
search for
Southeast ADA
ADA
Center, the
Live.
Burton Blatt
Have
Institute at
questions about the
Syracuse
Americans with
University,
Disabilities Act?
and the
Use the
ADA
online
National
form
Network,
anytime at
welcome to ADA
adalive.org
Live.
or contact
I'm
your
Stacy
regional ADA
Kernison, the
center at
ADA Distance
800
Learning and Training Coordinator
949
of the Southeast ADA
4232.
Center.
Again, all calls are free
Listening
and
audience,
confidential.
if you have questions about the
ADA Live
Americans
is a
with
program of
Disabilities
the
Act,
Southeast ADA
ADA,
Center,
you can
the
use the
Burton Black
online form
Institute at
anytime at
Syracuse University, and a
adalive.org or
collaboration with the
call the Southeast
Disabilities
ADA
Inclusive
Center
Employment
at
Policy
404
Rehabilitation Research and Training
541
Center. Our producer is
9001.
Celestia
All calls are
Aranza,
free and
and with me,
confidential.
I have Mary Mortar and
In this
Marsha Swanky.
episode, we will
Chase
discuss the
Coleman,
top
and
five
Barry Whaley.
hospitality
Our
holidays
music
for
is from the
guests
Four
with
Will City,
disabilities.
the
The
movement for
holidays are a
improvement.
busy time, filled with opportunity and responsibility for hotels, restaurants, and other places of public accommodation, providing access for every customer. The holidays are also a time of increased challenges for many people with disabilities. Some people may be overwhelmed by changes in typical routines and in sensory simulations of the holiday season. They may need a quiet space or sensory friendly options. Others may encounter accessibility barriers to buying, wrapping, or opening gifts and need reasonable modifications to business rules or services. The Southeast ADA Center reaches out to an expert on the ADA in hospitality to walk us through the ADA obligations of businesses and how they can meet the needs of people with disabilities during the holiday season. Our guest is Nancy Horton, the Associate Director of the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, another regional center of the ADA National Network, and a project of TransCen Incorporated. Nancy, welcome to the show and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. So let's jump right in. So here's a basic question to get us started. What can hotels and restaurants do to ensure that accessibility is never just a seasonal priority, but a year-round standard?
Well, I recommend a few things that I consider foundational. First and foremost, infuse accessibility into everything you do, how you approach and think about customer service. Remember that people with disabilities are customers or potential customers. They want to do the same things as other people, and they want to be able to do things with their families and friends and coworkers. So always think about how individuals with various types of disabilities will be able to participate in the activities you're offering. Another thing that is really important is training your employees. We'll talk a little bit more about this as we go along, but training your employees is really critical. And training volunteers as well, if you use volunteers in your programs. And finally, it's really essential to provide information to the public about the nature of your activities, events, and facilities, so people can make decisions and choices about what activities are of interest to them and whether facilities and environments are suitable for them. We're focused today on ways to make your services and activities more inclusive, but not all activities are going to be for everyone. So providing information is really a critical piece of planning for success in hospitality. You want potential patrons to know what you're offering and what they can expect. So be forthright, be accurate in providing information, and always provide contact information that's easy to find so people who have more specific questions can get more detailed information.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes, I think that's great information for individuals and businesses to be able to have all year round for any of the activities that they have. So we're kind of going to go through this, kind of hitting a few different holidays throughout the year. And let's first start with New Year's and New Year's Eve. So the New Year's Eve often means crowds of people, parties, and travel planning. For guests with disabilities, this holiday can either be magical or exhausting, depending on how prepared and disability aware the hospitality industry is. Fireworks, loud public spaces, long lines, plus reconfigured and unfamiliar floor plans can all create challenges for those with disabilities. Nancy, what are the most common barriers guests with disabilities face during major holidays, and how can hospitality teams and event planners better anticipate them?
Well, a really common barrier that we often hear about is a pretty basic one, and that is that holiday merchandise and displays encroach on accessible routes and spaces that need to be kept clear for individuals who use mobility devices like wheelchairs or walkers to be able to navigate facilities and spaces. This can make shopping, dining, or other activities really frustrating. There are certain minimum spaces that just need to be kept clear of products, displays, or furnishings all the time. I often say that larger space in the accessible toilet stall isn't empty. It's full of nothing, and it should be, and it needs to be kept that way because people who use mobility devices like wheelchairs need that empty space to maneuver. And there are many other examples of that kind of space that needs to be kept clear for people to move around. So if your store or dining room or other space is already pretty full, and then you add more products or displays or seating around the holidays, you might have a problem, and it doesn't pay off for you as a business if people can't move around in your space. It can be a case of something's got to give. So maybe you can scale back on the merchandise that's not as much in demand around a holiday to make room for the holiday related merchandise, or think about how you can add decorations that don't take up so much space or can be located out of the way. One thing about New Year's Eve in particular is that often there are still Christmas decorations. And then if you add more elements, more decorations, or a bandstand, or a dance floor, or something, you can really get squeezed for space. So you really need to think about how to preserve space for accessibility. Also, Stacy, you mentioned loud activities and long lines. And that gives me another opportunity to talk about the importance of providing information about activities and facilities so the public can make informed choices. If you are having an event where there are going to be fireworks, for example, give people information about that. Let them know what that's going to be like. Is there going to be seating provided for the fireworks display? And is accessible seating included? Are the fireworks going to be going off nearby and exploding right overhead? Or will they be viewed from across a lake or something like that? Give people some description of things. Make that part of your marketing. This sort of information can be helpful for potential customers without disabilities as well. And long lines can also be a real issue for some people. So, if possible, maybe scatter some seats or benches along the way so people who have difficulty standing for long periods of time can get some relief. Make sure you don't block those maneuvering spaces needed by people who use wheelchairs, though, especially if your space is very minimal or involves that serpentine kind of movement where people have to turn corners and go back and forth to move forward, because that can take more space if you're using a mobility device. Now, some venues use systems where people can request a return time based on an amount of time that the venue figures out is about how long they would spend in the line. Then the person and their party can return to the head of the line at that time. So they haven't really cut the line in the sense that they haven't gotten ahead of people who arrived before them, but they haven't physically spent the wait time in the line. A method like that can also be helpful for people who have other issues related to waiting in line other than just standing, but it does take a different type of management to manage a system like that. Another situation we sometimes hear about is similar in terms of people having difficulty standing for a long time, but different because it's not about waiting for the activity. It's about the activity itself, such as a concert or a performance that offers standing room only. These kinds of events can be challenging for individuals who have difficulty standing for long periods of time or just being in crowded spaces. It can also be difficult for individuals who use wheelchairs or scooters to get any kind of line of sight to a stage in crowded spaces where everyone else is standing. There could be options to address these kinds of needs, such as designating an accessible area that provides a line of sight for seated people, where individuals can be located by request. I've seen this done by creating space near the stage, or in larger events where temporary raised platforms accessed by ramps are installed at the sides or back of the standing room only area. Another issue I always encourage people to think about in all types of facilities and environments, but especially within places like nightclubs, theaters, and other venues where it may be crowded or loud, is egress. How are people going to get out if a fire alarm goes off or other unexpected event takes place and people need to evacuate? Everyone, with or without disabilities, needs to know what to do. Sometimes in simple facilities with good physical accessibility and proper signage and emergency lighting and everything in place, it can be managed fairly well. But evacuation for people with disabilities, especially in some types of facilities, can add considerations. For example, in some multi-story buildings with elevators, the elevators will shut down in an emergency mode, and some people with disabilities will not be able to get out the same way they got in. So I don't want to take the shine off of anyone's holiday spirit, but I do think it's important to have this issue on the radar, whether you're operating a venue or planning an event, or you're an individual planning to attend an event. We all need to think about this issue. Access isn't just about getting in, it's also about getting out.
Thank you, Nancy, for all of those wonderful examples to go along with some of the accommodations that should be available for those with accessibilities. One Chicago hotel even set up a temporary accessible lounge zones during their New Year's Eve event to help reduce lobby congestion and provide calm waiting areas for guests with mobility disabilities. So there are different ways that companies and businesses can provide accessible avenues for those who may need them. And you kind of spoke to this already, but also during the holiday events, we kind of have those who have the sensory elements like lighting, noise, and large crowds that impact guests with autism, low vision, or even post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. How would you think a business or entity could address those?
Well, individuals with sensory disabilities can certainly encounter barriers, both in the built environment and with temporary elements like decorative lighting, as well as with things that are more integral to programs and activities. A couple things I will say about lighting is that it is important to have enough lighting so that people, especially people with low vision, can be safe in navigating the environment. But in certain settings, you may want lower lighting to create some atmosphere, or you need lower lighting during a movie or performance. So you want to think about how to do that. You may be able to use some spot lighting or place some lighting along the edges of pathways or aisles, like you do often see in theaters, so people can navigate safely without having an entire space brightly lit. Another issue to be aware of is the effect that flashing or blinking lights can have for some people with disabilities. A lot of people really like the flashing and blinking lights around the holidays, but they can be problematic for some people. So if you really must use flashing or blinking lights, please make sure to use slower flash rates and to synchronize flash rates if there are different sets of flashing lights that can be seen within the same space. Lights that flash very can be very disorienting for some people. They can throw off people's balance or even trigger seizures for some people. So be cautious with flashing lights.
So thank you. So our next major holiday is Valentine's Day, and Valentine's Day is built on mood, ambiance, and intention. But for many disabled guests, romance becomes complicated if the venue isn't accessible. So we've talked about our bright lights, and now when we come to Valentine's Day, restaurants may have dim lighting, tightly packed tables, narrow paths of travel, plus overwhelmed servers and staff. So, what are the most overlooked accessibility details restaurants miss during high volume holidays like Valentine's Day?
Well, Valentine's Day does have some advantages over some other holidays in terms of being a bit gentler, if you will. It's certainly not as raucous as New Year's Eve, but it is a holiday that a lot of people like to dine out at restaurants. And those kinds of holidays, Mother's Day is another one, can be challenging for restaurant operators. They want to take advantage of the business opportunity, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they do want to preserve a quality of experience so patrons enjoy themselves. One thing that a lot of restaurants do on busy holidays is offer a limited menu, which is a great way to simplify things for both employees and customers. I do encourage restaurants to think about the options that they offer so that there's some variety to it and so that there are items that may meet the needs of people who have dietary restrictions or items that can be more easily adjusted to meet those needs. Dishes that can more easily have ingredients left off, for example, without it being a really big deal to the kitchen staff. Now, a couple of other issues you mentioned, tightly packed tables and narrow paths of travel, can certainly affect accessibility, but also customers' experiences overall, I think. Crowdedness can affect maneuvering for people who use mobility devices and raise the noise level, which can make communication more difficult for people who are hard of hearing and others. But I would also encourage restaurant operators to consider that there's a point where a certain level of crowdedness and noise is just not romantic for anyone. I do want to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about accessible dining tables. Since we're talking about restaurants, an accessible dining table is one that an individual who is using a wheelchair can pull right up under and stay in their wheelchair. They're not going to get out of their wheelchair and get in a dining chair. They're going to pull right up, and they need to be able to pull right up under the table. And, very importantly, there is an accessible route so the person can get to the table in the first place. Not all dining tables in a restaurant need to be accessible. At least 5% should be accessible, and they should be dispersed throughout a dining area or different dining areas. If there's outdoor seating, indoor seating, seating in a bar, private dining rooms, or other specialty areas, there should be accessibility in those different areas. So people with disabilities have the same kinds of options as others. But even if you just have one large dining room, you know it's going to be packed on Valentine's Day. You really want to make sure you have at least that minimum amount of seating that people using mobility devices can get to. And even if you usually allow people to choose their own seating, you may want to consider using a host to seat people and try to preserve those accessible locations for folks who need them until other tables are full. Sometimes, especially in smaller spaces, accessible tables can be located around the outer edges of the seating area, which reduces the need to maintain accessible routes throughout into an entire seating area, which can be challenging, especially when the place is packed. And such a configuration can work if it doesn't create physical segregation or a feeling of segregation for people who need the accessible seating. You don't want all the accessible seating clustered by the kitchen door or cut off from the view out the windows or those kinds of things. But people using wheelchairs and scooters and walkers also don't like to have to wind their way through crowded tables and other seated diners and have to say, excuse me. And then the gentleman who's pulled his chair all the way out into the aisle gets up to push his chair in, he drops his napkin, and so on and so on. So I really recommend operators think about this issue because we do tend to want to make the most of our space. And sometimes we just arrange furnishings in a very minimalist way. And we really want to think about it when it's going to be full of people and servers and trays and clattering dishes and all of that. Experienced restaurant operators and party planners really get this issue, but there can be a learning curve in finding that balance between maximizing the space and maintaining a pleasant experience.
Thank you so much, Nancy, for those details. Because there is even a boutique hotel in Atlanta that created sensory-friendly romance packages with adjustable lighting, quiet hours, and autism awareness staff. So there are ways that those entities, those public accommodations, restaurants can make adjustments to their everyday activities in order to make sure that they are more inclusive. And you've kind of spoken to this question already with the tables and making sure that individuals are able to maneuver in and out. But how can public accommodations balance festive decor with the requirement to maintain that clear and accessible path of travel?
Well, one effective way to add to a festive atmosphere without taking up floor space is to mount low profile decorations on walls or to use overhead space. Hanging decorations and lighting from the ceiling can be very festive. The caution here is just to make sure that decorations don't protrude too far or hang down too low into circulation spaces because people who are blind or have low vision might bump into them. So you don't want anything to stick out from the wall more than 4 inches into a circulation space between 27 inches and 80 inches above the floor. And nothing overhead should hang down lower than 80 inches. But you can do a lot with those spaces outside those limits.
Okay, Nancy, we've talked about New Year's and Valentine's Day. Now let's get into some of that summer travel season. So, summer is our time to hit the open road and enjoy family vacations, theme parks, pools, and beaches. This is where the cracks in accessibility often show the most. So, children with disabilities travel more during the summer months, and older adults take extended vacations. Outdoor dining expands, but it's not always accessible. So, Nancy, how can we train hospitality staff to deliver accessible and inclusive experiences to guests with disabilities, especially during the busiest travel season?
I think the key to providing effective training is to provide different types and levels of training. It's challenging to provide training to all employees in any business or operation, but it's really critical for businesses that are very oriented to interacting with the public. And by the way, we should keep in mind that not only businesses that offer hospitality activities and services are really our focus here today. We're talking about businesses, but state and local government agencies, which are also covered by the ADA, conduct all kinds of hospitality programs. They operate places of lodging, ranging from luxury hotels in state parks to cabins and campgrounds. They operate all kinds of places focused on tourism, and they offer a wide variety of recreational and seasonal activities. So really everything we're talking about is relevant in those settings as well. But in any kind of operation where you have a high turnover in your workforce, seasonal employees, or a wide range of types of jobs, you really need to train everyone to at least what I often call the awareness level. Not every employee needs to be an expert on the Americans with Disabilities Act, but they need to have some very simple, very basic information about how to interact with people with disabilities. Some employees need additional information that is specific to their jobs. Hotel reservation agents, waiters in restaurants, employees who secure people into cars on amusement rides, housekeeping staff, tour bus drivers. These employees need some information that is specific to their roles. And most importantly, frontline employees need to know whom to contact when they encounter a situation that they're not sure about. Supervisors and managers need to have that next level knowledge and training so that if the employee at the ticket window of the theater is asked a question or receives a request they're not sure about, there is someone they can call upon who will be able to respond to that customer. The investment in training will pay off when both employees and customers can have more comfortable and successful interactions.
So, when we talk about hotels, and this could be anytime during the travel season, what responsibilities do hotels have when accessible rooms are overbooked or mistakenly reassigned during those major holiday weekends?
Well, this is a really great question, and it's a really interesting area because hotels are subject to some really specific ADA requirements that generally help them and their guests avoid these kinds of situations in the first place. They're only required to have a certain minimum number of accessible rooms based on the total number of rooms in a facility. There are two kinds of accessible guest rooms. One kind is designed to be accessible for people with mobility disabilities, including individuals who use wheelchairs. Another kind is equipped with communication devices designed for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Both kinds of accessible rooms should be dispersed among the different types of rooms offered by the hotel. Most hotels have at least a couple of different types, such as rooms with one bed and rooms with two beds. Many hotels also have suites or other types of unique rooms. Some rooms are even considered special based on where they're located. For example, some rooms have a stunning view of a beach or the mountains or a city skyline. So accessible rooms should be dispersed as much as possible, but generally not all rooms are going to be accessible and usable for people with disabilities. So hotels need to do a few things. They need to provide information and description about the accessibility of their properties, including accessible guest rooms and public or common areas such as parking facilities, lobbies, lounges, food service areas, fitness facilities, swimming pools, or meeting rooms. Information needs to be detailed enough for people to be able to determine if facilities and available guest rooms will meet their needs. This is a requirement in Title III of the ADA that hotels are subject to. As we've talked about, we recommend that all types of customer-oriented businesses provide information about their facilities and their activities. But for hotels, this is literally a regulatory requirement to provide information about their properties. And it's very important to avoid a situation where a person may arrive at a hotel, possibly far from home, and find they can't get into the bathroom, for example. Hotels also need to hold accessible guest rooms for individuals with disabilities until all other guest rooms of that type have been rented. When only accessible rooms of a particular type remain available, no, people with disabilities haven't requested them, they're still available, but no other rooms are available within a particular type, those rooms can be rented to anyone. If a one-of-a-kind room, such as a bridal suite, for example, is accessible, it can be rented to the first party who requests it, since it's the only one of its type. When an accessible guest room or a specific type of accessible guest room has been reserved, it needs to be blocked and removed from all reservation systems. And hotels need to guarantee that a specific accessible guest room reserved is held for that customer, even when the hotel might not guarantee specific rooms for others. And again, this is because there are usually multiple inaccessible rooms of a type that could be provided and meet the needs of a guest, but there literally might be only one room that would work for a guest with a disability. So these steps are really important to try to ensure that guests get rooms and facilities they can use. However, sometimes guests in accessible rooms overstay their original reservation, and a room that was expected to be available on a certain date is not, and no other room in the hotel is available that will meet the needs of the arriving guest. The hotel may be able to move the holdover guest to another room, but if that's not possible, the hotel can try to find a suitable room in another nearby hotel that will meet the needs of the arriving guest.
The guest has now got into their room, they're all settled, traveled all day, and now it's time to eat. So let's talk a little bit about restaurants. How can restaurants use technology like QR codes and menus, online ordering, or reservation notes to serve guests with hearing, vision, or cognitive disabilities?
Well, using technology can be a great way to provide information to people in general and to enable people to access information or make purchases or reservations more independently, which can make things easier for customers and free up employee time for businesses as well. There are a couple things that are key in making sure people with disabilities can take advantage of these opportunities. One, again, is to include information about accessibility and the nature of events and activities on your websites and apps. Also, websites that are organized and uncluttered and web forms that are simple and easy to follow, easy to use will benefit individuals with cognitive disabilities and generally be more user-friendly. Websites and apps also need to be technically accessible so that people with disabilities can use them, including people who use assistive technologies. People who are blind or have low vision often use assistive technologies to either enlarge the displays on their devices or to convert text to speech so they can listen to it instead of reading it by sight. Images that are used to convey information need to be described via the alternative text field, which is available, so that screen reading technologies used by many people who are blind can access that information. If videos are used to convey information, they may need captions to ensure access to any audible information for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, and audio description to provide access to visual information for people who are blind or have low vision. Often videos, especially if they're fairly short, promotional types of videos, can be fairly easily designed to incorporate these elements right into the video rather than having to add these elements. If some simple visual information is displayed on the screen, such as the date, phone number, say that in the audio track, and vice versa. If information is spoken, put that information on the screen. Some videos that are longer or more complex might need to have those kinds of features added as options for people to be able to turn on or off, or different versions for people to choose. If you're doing something more complex, I recommend working with professionals who know how to design and create accessible videos.
Now it's time for us to enjoy the beach and the pool. So, what steps can beaches, pools, and outdoor venues take during the summer travel season to create safe, inclusive recreational spaces?
Outdoor venues can certainly present additional challenges to access and inclusion. And when we move further into areas that are intended to be more natural and less developed, we do encounter additional considerations. But there are standards and guidelines that address access to a variety of recreational and outdoor facilities. And there really is a lot of variety here. Access to a basic swimming pool at a hotel, for example, is fairly straightforward. We have standards for that. It's in a highly developed, built environment. Of course, we have a lot of older facilities, and addressing access in existing spaces can present challenges and limitations, and it's certainly something we need to continue working on over time. But for many types of facilities, we know what the goal is. We know precisely what features an accessible facility should have. When we get to things like beaches and trails and wilderness campsites, we have additional considerations. But we also have some very helpful guidelines that have been developed over many years with research and the input of experts in various fields. These guidelines can help us think through how to achieve better access while preserving natural environments and experiences. The guidelines for outdoor developed areas are actually mandatory. They are standards, in fact, for federal executive agencies under the Architectural Barriers Act. These standards address beach access routes, trails, and camping and picnic facilities. And the standards serve as excellent guidelines for agencies and businesses covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Because if you're covered by the law and you're building or altering or operating these types of facilities, you have to make them accessible as you can, regardless of whether we have standards for them or not. Standards are developed over time, but the obligation to make facilities and programs and services accessible is there. So we have to make things as accessible as possible and as appropriate. And so following these guidelines is a very good way of addressing access in these kinds of spaces. There are also some steps that can help make outdoor events safer and more user-friendly. Again, think about providing some seating at events that involve a lot of standing or walking. Think about shade, think about shelter, drinking water. If there are going to be portable toilet facilities, don't forget the accessible ones. 5% at each location where portable toilet units are provided, folks. Also, don't forget about communication access at outdoor events. Measures may need to be taken to ensure access to speeches, performances, or sporting events. Captioning or sign language interpretation may be needed, and at larger events may need to be displayed on screens. Again, staff training, very, very important for outdoor activities as well.
Thank you. There was even a Miami resort that partnered with adaptive beach programs to create a seamless beach experience for guests with mobility disabilities. And we have on our site at the Southeast ADA Center a beach access video, and we will make sure that we add those to our resource list. So now we've gone into the fall season and Thanksgiving is amongst us. So Thanksgiving brings together large family gatherings with restaurant buffets, hotel reservations, and crowded spaces. So how can restaurants and hotels redesign traditional Thanksgiving buffets and dining spaces to ensure they are fully accessible to guests with medical, dietary, mobility, sensory, or even visual disabilities?
Well, buffets that generally require self-service can present some accessibility challenges, but there are some things that restaurants can do to make things easier and safer. People with disabilities like buffets too. Buffets often provide people with more variety and choice, and the buffet table can create some opportunities for diners to interact with each other more than where everyone stays in their individual seating location throughout a meal or event. Setting up buffets, or even something like an omelet bar or a carving station, starts with providing accessible routes and maneuvering clearances so that people who use mobility devices can get to them. Self-serve items need to be within reach, so buffet tables should not be so wide that an individual using a wheelchair or a person of short stature can't reach items at the back. Similarly, items shouldn't be placed very high up on stacked or tiered serving stands unless the items on top are duplicated below. So, for example, instead of putting all the brownie bites on the bottom and all the apple tarts on the top, put some of each on both levels. Tiered servers can help maximize table space, but make sure people can reach all the items on offer. Always provide labels or signs that identify food items and ingredients, and make the signs easy to read with simple fonts and characters of reasonable size. Make unique information prominent. If a dessert is sugar-free, include that information right up top. This is really helpful for people who have allergies or dietary restrictions, but it can also help avoid waste or unpleasant experiences for people who don't like or just don't eat certain ingredients. Most buffets that really are intended for self-service usually do have some staff on hand to keep an eye out for items that need replenishing or for clearing and cleaning up. Staff should be trained to keep an eye out and offer assistance to patrons who might need assistance with serving, carrying items back to their websites, or even to get information that maybe that on the signs, lists of ingredients and things, if they're not able to see those or read those, they might need some assistance. So again, the staff training piece is always important, no matter what type of activity or service we're talking about.
There was even a Marriott hotel in Charlotte, North Carolina that lowered part of the buffet line, widened its pathways, and added staff assistant services specifically for disabled guests. So that is doable. So now we've no longer in the restaurants. Let's head over to the grandmother's house or the family household. So during family-centered holidays like Thanksgiving, what can families and also going into businesses and hospitality teams do to create inclusiveness for guests with disabilities when social activities and environmental barriers such as bad weather make being part of the fun more difficult?
I think planning for some options is something that makes sense for many types of activities, not only to be inclusive of people with disabilities, but just to be inclusive, full stop. Activities designed for families or groups are going to include children and older people, people who want to take a hike through the woods after dinner, and people who want to sit by the fireplace. So I think, especially when outdoor activities are intended to be part of the agenda, there should be an option. Maybe there are games or crafts or other indoor activities available. Maybe there's a quiet corner where someone who just needs a break from it all can sit and do absolutely nothing. Not everyone needs or wants to always be doing something. To paraphrase the old saying, sometimes I sit and think, and sometimes I just sit.
Now we've gone in from the fall into the winter, and we're into those December holidays where the season brings the highest volume of special events from office parties, family gatherings, Santa meet and greets, the shopping rush, and holiday decorations. So, how can hospitality staff design holiday programming that is both festive and authentically inclusive without segregating or othering guests with disabilities?
Well, I think a lot of the things that we've talked about are really key because it's really about finding the balance of trying to make any facility and any activity as inclusive as possible while continuing to offer a variety of activities in a variety of environments and recognizing that not all activities are going to be for everyone. In general, I think with certain things, take it easy with the flashing lights. Avoid the heavy fragrances and chemical products. But again, it's okay to have some variety of activities. Not everybody wants to do exactly the same thing. But if we make our activities and environments inclusive and we provide good information about those activities and environments so people can make those informed choices about where they want to go, we all benefit from that. Families, friends, and colleagues can be together, and businesses can gain more satisfied customers.
Nancy Horton, thank you again for being with us today to share this important information.
Listeners, thank you for joining us for this episode. You can access all ADA Live episodes with archived audio, accessible transcripts, and resources on our website at adalive.org. You can listen to the SoundCloud ADA Live channel at soundcloud.com/ADA Live. Download ADA Live to your mobile device. Go to your podcast app and search for ADA Live. Have questions about the Americans with Disabilities Act? Use the online form anytime at adalive.org or contact your regional ADA center at 800-949-4232. Again, all calls are free and confidential. ADA Live is a program of the Southeast ADA Center, the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University, and a collaboration with the Disability Inclusive Employment Policy Rehabilitation Research and Training Center. Our producer is Celestia Orazda, and with me, I have Mary Mortar and Marsha Swanky, Chase Coleman, and Barry Whaley. Our music is from the Four Wheel City, the Movement for Improvement.
Yeah, coppers overs. They watching. They don't want us to be a part of their city, man. They pull all these steps, man. All these curves you can't get over good, though. All these inaccessible stores. Four Wheel City. They don't want us here.